I'm Dr. Jeff Drognet. I want to welcome you to my channel. It's called New Earth Vet. Also, it's called Become Your Own Vet, and you'll see why. And my goal is to teach you how to get into call it the natural world, the holistic world with your four-legged friend. And this could be very simply using natural therapies. It can be feeding a wholesome, real food, eliminating toxins, that includes vaccines, stuff like that, and how to treat diseases and save costs on veterinary bills. There's also a little bit of a section on dog behavior, which I think you'll find useful if you've got some ambition to try and help things with that. People ask me, when did you want to become a veterinarian? And so I have to take that back to way back when I was 12 years old. And when I was that age, I actually went for a walk down the pier in White Rock, West British Columbia, Canada. Big long pier. And I went out because it was a stormy day and the waves were crashing over the rocks at the end of the pier. And I wanted to go down and have a look. And you can imagine I was a 12-year-old. I went down all by myself. It's something you don't see these days now. But I went down there and there's nobody else on the whole pier. And the pier's a quarter of a mile long. And so I went down there, and as I looked over, there's this dog struggling in the water, and it's a boat wharf. He couldn't get out. And I don't even know how we ever got there. Never did find that out after either. But anyway, imagine me, little guy. I ended up reaching over and then pulling this guy up onto the jetty. And of course, then it became hey, Mom, Dad, I found a dog. So I took him home with me, cleaned him up, dried him off, and they actually took him to the vet to be checked because he wasn't in great shape and he was shivering like crazy. But anyway, the main thing is that he was okay. He got a little bit of food, and then we tracked down the owners. And so that was the first time that I'd actually helped an animal. We didn't have a dog at home at that time. We had a couple of cats, but that was my first foray into helping an animal. So just imagine, at that point, I was 12 years old. Here's a picture of me when I was in my cub pack. And if you probably can't recognize me because my wife hardly could recognize me in the picture, but middle row, far right, the guy that looks probably the tiniest there. And I was very small for my age at that time. But anyway, it was me who pulled that Airedale out of the water. So you can imagine it wasn't a real easy feat, but I did it. So after that, I started getting more into animals, and as I call it, I did the compulsory reading that you have to do. I had a whole book set of Dr. Dolittle. And with that, I was able to see about meat animal stories, things like that. And then after that, of course, it was James Herriot. And James Herriot had this wonderful life in England, going from place to place, saving animals' lives, cows, horses, dogs, whatever. And the main thing with that is that's something I think I'd really like to get into. So when I was about 14, I decided, I think I'd like to become a veterinarian. During that time, I ended up having, of course, dogs and cats at home. I had a horse, and here's a picture of that guy. I actually competed with, his name was Amir. I competed with him, and it was just in some Western classes, nothing really fancy. Didn't do very well either, just so you know. But anyway, that was the horse world. And I had, my mother loved this, 6 tanks of fish in my bedroom. And I actually made the cabinetry for them, which was just 2x2s, and made sure they stood up well. And I had all these tanks in there. You can imagine 6 tanks in a bedroom. They don't smell that good, But I was diligent. I raised swordtails and guppies. That was my forte. And actually sold them to the local pet store so I could get fish food. So that's how that worked. And so that was sort of how I got into the animals at home. And certainly I learned a lot by doing that. So just a couple of other things. I had another passion, and that was music. And here you have the picture of me in a community band. It's actually going down the road in a truck. And my instrument, the one I played, was trombone. And I actually still play it to this day. I've been in several bands over the years, and it's a lot of fun learning it from then and still playing through. And also, I play with a native flute. So I went through high school, went to university, and after I call it a long road of 7 years, I actually became a veterinarian. And my goal, of course, was to get into practice, which I did. I went back to White Rock, which is where I grew up, and found a practice there that hired me. And that's where I started my job. Became a partner in the hospital. And here's a picture of the staff. I was the second vet there. And by a couple of years later, 6 years later, we had 4 veterinarians. So that was a very busy, bustling practice. During that time, I ended up getting into a little bit of teaching. I created a pet first aid class and I also started teaching veterinary assistants. And here's a picture of me doing a presentation for the veterinary conference, which is in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I had a full room of assistants and such who wanted to learn stuff from me. And it was just fantastic. I really got into it doing that. The other thing with practice is that I was just having a ball. And here's a picture of me with one of my patients. And I always joke about this is veterinarians can get away with kissing their patients. And it's not something you can do in human land at all. But yeah, I can give my patients a hug and nobody seems to mind, which is wonderful. So that practice, I stayed there for 12 years and then ended up leaving. And there's a couple of reasons why I left. One was because I got married and my wife, Louise, is a veterinarian herself. And we wanted to practice together. And so we decided that, yeah, we're going to open up our own practice. And I was really starting to pay attention to how I was taking care of the patients. And the thing that changed it all was our own dog, Courtney. We call her Courtney the Wonder Mutt. She was a lab pit bull cross. And here is a picture of her carrying her stick along the beach. The thing about that is that I started looking at the food and thinking, gee, we could do a little bit better than that. And I started off by just putting a little bit of meat on her regular dry food. And then after that, I started cooking some food for her. And that was sort of mimicked after the regular foods as well in terms of what I put in there. But the point is, it was a gradual process. You know, I added meat and then I started making up a diet. And the main thing with that is you can't really screw up unless you're really messing things up royally. But the problem with it is this. Veterinarians are not trained in that type of nutrition. At least not when I went through. I had a whole hour of nutrition for dogs and cats. That was it. And so the problem is most veterinarians graduate and they're told that you have to feed a complete and balanced food. That's what I was told. And the poster child food at that time was Purina dog chow. So you can imagine, yeah, we can do a whole lot better than that, team. You know, so the thing is, the foray into the food was the sort of the first thing that was, gee, we don't have to follow the conventional lines. So in practice, Louise and I started going and we were saying, hey, you know, we can not feed commercial foods. I took a course in acupuncture and then chiropractic, you know, getting certified and such. And the whole point is the practice just got more and more holistic. And so we started recommending foods that were other veterinarians wouldn't dare touch, as in they weren't commercial foods. And the other side is also my main thing was getting into the vaccine whole thing. And that is when I went through school, I was told that dogs and cats need vaccines every year. And then finally guidelines came out in about 1995. And what they said is that you can get away with doing them every 3 years. And that was a good start. But in the fine print of those guidelines, it actually said you can actually get good for a lifetime. And so that kind of, hold it, why aren't we doing that? Most veterinarians picked up on the 3 year. But even now, these days, 30 years later, veterinarians are giving vaccines, 40% of them every year. And it's kind of like, gee, guys, have you read anything from the last 3 decades? It's time to try to make a change. So as you can see, our practice was a lot different from any other practices around us. And so they didn't really want to talk to us or refer to us or do anything like that. But we had a very good, solid group of people who really looked after their animals. And teaching them everything was exactly what we wanted to do. On the teaching front, just so you know, I talked about the pet first aid class, and then I started the veterinary assistants. And over 20 years working through colleges, I taught over 42,000 students. And I'm quite proud of that because it really had an impact on a lot of people getting into the veterinary profession. So I really like doing that. And since I left practice, that was roughly about 3 years ago, I decided I'm going to move fully into the holistic education. I already had some courses, but I really moved into a full bore. And the result that you're seeing here, this channel, is exactly what I wanted to do. And that is get something going so people can learn things and not have to take a class or do anything like that. So the key with it is I want you to keep learning. Check out all the webinars that I've got. I'm always adding more. And you'll notice that, you can sign up for a newsletter sometimes, that type of thing. And if you do that, you're going to find out that, hey, I've got newsletters going out. I've got free courses that I have periodically for people to learn from. And so you can get lots of information and you can find out how to treat your pets holistically and just keep them healthier. And that's the key. That's what I want you to do. So, as I always say, I'll see you in class.